Welcome, everybody. I'm Josh Macauer. I'm the director of the Stanford Biodesign Center for Biodesign and co-founder. We're fortunate to have my co-founder here, Paul Yock, who really played an essential role in visioning this opportunity that we're really talking about tonight. These are special for us. We've already had one so far with Uday Kumar. This is also along the same themes. We decided, we often have folks from the community come, and we realized we have such a rich community right here. It's great to honor our people. So that's sort of the theme for this year. You'll notice that probably, and really just celebrate what this whole series was created to do. Many of you probably don't remember this old show called In the Actors Studio. But in that program, they would get actors to sort of unravel what made them, what made them choose their career path. How do they approach their career, their jobs, and what do they bring to it, so that, all of us can benefit from that and be inspired. But we realized, who's doing that for medical innovation, and that's us. So here we are. In the Innovator's Workbench, understanding what goes into the creation and ideation and invention and all the struggles and the failures and the successes of innovators. So what's cool about this story, which really began in 2007, is that this has had not a, let's say, a clear path along the way. There were definitely bumps and turns along the way. You're going to hear about those. But what has been accomplished over 17 years truly is remarkable, and it's something we're all very, very proud of. And the folks here on stage tonight are responsible for leading through that effort into present day. It continues. Very special group here, which I'll let Awo introduce in more detail, but I just want to say they're all innovators, every single one, in different ways. And what they brought to this whole process has been one example of true innovation and meeting the needs of the folks that are, that you're focused on at the time. I'm going to say we're sorry to not have Krista Donaldson here tonight. I know she's probably watching, who is unwell, and we're very sorry that she couldn't be here, because she certainly brings in herself a experience of being an innovator across many different continents in very interesting situations. So she would have added a lot. And so we're sorry to not have her here, and she's a very important part of our program. But we're very thankful to have Awo Addo to step into the fray to be the moderator tonight. Awo is amazing. Many of you may not know she's a Princeton grad with a degree in economics and also an MBA from Wharton. She has spent time in consulting with BCG, worked at some of the big tech companies like Google and LinkedIn, and we are so tremendously fortunate to have her leading our marketing, communication, and events activity, and a true pleasure to have Al with us and leading tonight's talk. I'll just say a few more things and then hand it over to Al. First of all, thank you to Wilson Sonsini for sponsoring this event. I want to remind everybody to silence their cell phones, which I'm going to do right now myself, so that I'm compliant with that. And please welcome Anurag, Ritu, Raj, and Chris and Awo for a very interesting talk about Biodesign India. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Josh. I hope you can all hear me okay. Yes, so as Josh mentioned, my name is Awo Addo, and I lead our marketing and communications efforts here at Biodesign. And it is really a pleasure to be able to moderate this conversation with Raj, Ritu, and Anurag. So as Josh mentioned, Stanford-India Biodesign launched in 2007. Between 2008 and 2015, 32 fellows were trained. Those fellows developed more than 20 new technologies and launched 12 startups. But the impact of the program goes way beyond the 32 fellows. The training model has been deployed at more than a dozen universities, including 8 IITs. And now more than 4,000 health technology startups operate across the country. So how did all of that happen? Joining us tonight to share the story are Rajiv Doshi, who was the founding executive director of Stanford-India Biodesign and is currently the director of the India program here at Biodesign. Anurag Mairal was the associate director of Stanford-India Biodesign and now director of global outreach. And Ritu was a fellow in the Stanford-India Biodesign program, and she is now director of global programs here at Biodesign. So thank you all for being here. So I'm going to start with Raj. Can you paint us a picture of biodesign and health innovation here at Stanford 17 years ago? What was happening? How did the program come to be? How did you get involved?
Okay, great. So in 2007, so too loud. 2007, biodesign was in many ways still evolving. We were focused on the U.S. as a market. We had no international partnerships, and in some ways, we're still sort of finding our footing and evolving our own program. And at that time, I was a startup CEO. I'd finished a few years as a venture capitalist, and I had been teaching mechanical engineering here for about 7 years. And one day I got a call from Paul Yock, who was the director of biodesign at the time. And he told me about this great conversation he had with the director of biotechnology from the government of India, a gentleman named Dr. M.K. Ban. And they had discussed how there may be an opportunity to take our biodesign process, which was really designed for the US context, and then to evolve it and make it modified for the Indian context. So those discussions started in 2007, and we were invited to Delhi, 4 of us, Paul, myself, Harry Greenberg, who's the senior dean of research, and Phil Pizzo, who's the dean of medical school, to present what was a very ambitious vision for this Stanford-India Biodesign program. And really, that was sort of the nidus of the program. But I just wanted to share that's really Paul, who is here with us today, and Dr. Ban were 2 of the real visionaries who enabled this program to start. So I wanted to acknowledge both of them. Thanks, Paul.
You let us do it, Paul.
Thank you, Raj. Anurag, can you tell us about what medtech innovation in India was like at that time, and also how you came to be involved in the program?
So right around the time that Raj was being asked by Paul to do this, I was working at J&J, and I was sourcing technologies from emerging markets. That was my role at J&J. I was a director of business development, and emerging markets was my focus. And I was pretty disappointed about the kinds of things I was seeing coming from emerging markets. These are like new handle design or whatever. Wasn't like really disruptive innovation coming from places like India. And then J&J decided to start an innovation center in India, and we started to see some movement. But that's when I met with Paul, and Paul connected me with Raj. And Raj and I had dinner or lunch at this Thai restaurant where we talked about this program coming up. And I said, "You're going to work with government of India? It's going to take for forever." And so he said, "Would you like to join?" I said, "No, thank you. I'm good at J&J." Fast forward 6 months later, not only the program is up and running, there are fellows candidates being flown in for an interview, and I ended up being invited to do the interview. I said, "This has actually gone much better than I expected, and it's something that I would like to do." So I left J&J and I joined Stanford.
Very cool. So what were the initial goals of the program? What were you hoping to achieve? And, what was it like to work with the government? Anurag's already giving us some indication.
Our goal at the time was, we actually had great, ambitious goals. Like, we really wanted to jumpstart an innovation ecosystem in medtech in India, one that would hopefully lead to a generational change. That being said, that was our private discussion. Our public discussion was, well, we're going to have a fellowship program and help build an ecosystem. But privately, we had a much grander vision for the program. So, Anurag, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think we did, except we didn't really know what we were getting into.
Yeah, that's true too.
So it was ambitious, yet a lot of stuff that we would find out later on, we hadn't figured out. But our goals were pretty big.
Okay. And how did you collaborate with the government on this? Like, what were the advantages of starting something like this with the government? What were some challenges that you had to work through?
So I think the advantage, so first of all, the Indian government has been this extraordinary supporter and advocate over the last 17 years. And it's been consistent support from the Department of Biotechnology, which has funded many institutions since then that teach biodesign. But it really comes down to scale. The government provides an opportunity to scale something that works. And the challenge is just sort of understanding government processes and timelines. We weren't used to it, but that being said, as we developed those relationships, we really gained an affinity for the people and for the mission, and it turned out to be a tremendous partnership.
Cool. Ritu, you were in one of the early cohorts. So can you tell us how you heard about the fellowship, what you were doing at the time, and what drew you to this opportunity?
I was in graduate school studying biomedical engineering and at Penn. And before that, I had spent 1.5 years working in South Africa with a global health nonprofit that was focused on prevention of mother-to-child transmission. And it was, I'm a technologist, I had been an engineer, and I went to this nonprofit, and it was the first time that I saw healthcare outcomes, it was basically my first job. I saw healthcare outcomes, but they were being moved not by technology, but just by people talking. So I came back to grad school and I had these sort of two ideas in my mind. You can affect patient impact by technology, and you can affect patient impact by a lot of other kinds of systemic innovation. And like very divergent ideas. And then my father saw this ad in the Times of India, which is one of the largest newspapers in India, that said, accepting applicants for Stanford-India Biodesign, and the due date was about 4 days out. And he sent it to me and he said, you should think about this. So I was like, this is perfect. This is bringing together the two things that I think are so disparate. How do you do technology innovation, but also how do you do it in an India-like setting? So I applied, I was accepted to the program, and that was sort of the beginning of it.
And can you talk about the fellowship experience? How many of you were in the cohort? How did it unfold? What was it like?
So at the time, we used to have, it was a year-long fellowship. 6 months of the fellowship was spent here at Stanford, and the other 6 months was spent back in India, in Delhi, at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, AIIMS, which is the premier healthcare center in India. And so the structure was that there was a team of 4, 1 or 2 doctors, 1 or 2 engineers, 1 or 2 designers. Most of our teams were structured that way. And so the 4 of us, we were like any other innovation team that you see at Biodesign. We spent time immersing in the Stanford Hospital. We were part of the innovation course. We ran through a project, and then we sort of said pause. And then we all flew back home. And in Delhi, we started again. We immersed at AIIMS, but we also immersed in district hospitals in Haryana and Delhi. At the time, we had fellows from previous years also. We were all sort of working together at AIIMS, and we took a trip to South India because India is so diverse. Healthcare in India is so diverse. So we spent a lot of time looking at different levels of healthcare in India, and then using that as a way to start, do our needs finding and then find the needs that we worked on. And then we continued to work on our project. My team was focused on maternal and neonatal health in our year. And one of the projects that we worked on, or the need that we worked on, was in the neonatal hearing loss area. So babies that are born in India, we noticed are not screened for congenital hearing loss. And often congenital hearing loss is not found in these babies until 2 or 3 years later, when they have lost speech and lost the ability to rehabilitate. So my co-teammate, Nitin Sisodia, he is the CEO of Soham Innovation Labs, which is a ongoing concern. They have screened over 150,000 infants to date in India, and he has really led a remarkable innovation, not just, again, from that technology perspective, but also just increasing awareness of hearing loss, building a complete system around it, and building an ecosystem of how he's brought this innovation to life. And it's now in public procurement, et cetera. So it's been a fantastic journey.
Very nice. Raj and Anurag, I saw an quite old interview with both of you, where one of the things you talk about is the fact that at the time, clinicians were not really involved in health technology innovation in India. So when you started SIP, how was that received? And, how did you get the clinicians on board to work through that?
Yeah, India is very, a high context country, and doctors are considered highest in the food chain in terms of, how they work with everybody else. So doctors never really collaborated with engineers necessarily to do innovation. It's typically engineers who tinkered around with things, and they would take them to the doctor. Doctor would say, this is good or bad. So it just wasn't the kind of model that we now have in India. So it was different. And also, oftentimes doctors saw the needs in very narrow ways, which was constrained by what they were doing. They didn't step back and look at the need in the broader context. So that was a bit of a challenge as well.
Okay.
This program basically, for the first time, showed these doctors the value of engineers and doctors working together.
Yeah, one of the challenges with India is that the educational system is really based on the old British system, right? So people make a choice to become either a physician or an engineer. You typically make that choice at age 17 and probably not look back or not then communicate with others in the other discipline. And, if you're interested in innovation, especially in medtech, you really need to be, have people that are living in both worlds, right? That's one of the reasons that Stanford has been, I think, so successful, is that a lot of us are cross-trained as engineers and as physicians. So India was lacking that. So helping to sort of recreate some of those connections, in this case, between AIMS, which is the medical center, and IIT Delhi, which is a center of engineering excellence, even though they're a couple of kilometers down the road, just sort of making sure that there were ongoing collaborations leading to translational successes, meaning something that was developed and made to a state that it could be commercialized. That was a bit of the process. But just this whole change in sort of how these two sort of disciplines sort of engaged one another, that was an important part of our first 4 years, just a mindset change.
Wonderful. Okay. How did the program evolve over time? Can you talk about the first phase of the program and what you saw in that time?
Yeah, so the first 8 years was a traditional fellowship. It was largely based on the US model that Ritu had described, 6 months here and then 6 or 12 months back at AIMS. So over the course of 8 years, we trained 32 fellows. And what we found is that in time, the fellows that we trained truly became experts in the Indian context, and the center at AIMS really became quite expert in teaching the biodesign process, especially with the Indian context in mind. So in time, we realized, okay, well, we can sort of, the intention was to sort of transition the program to the AIMS Center, which we ultimately did in 2016. But I think we learned along the way. The other thing that happened was that as we trained these groups of fellows, we built an ecosystem of fellows, and they were very much helping one another throughout the years, and also building out a larger ecosystem in Delhi and even across India. In fact, that was one of our areas of focus, was how do you create a nationwide ecosystem through our annual medical device summit and whatnot. And anyway, so that's how we sort of evolved in time. It was not just about the fellowship, it was this broader ecosystem that evolved as well.
Got it. And how did you sort of get funders, suppliers, manufacturers, all of the people who would be required to get the technologies from creation to patient? What was the mechanism to get that together?
Yeah, I remember the very first year we did that, we had 35 people around the table, and we basically had called all of these people that we knew. And this was one big round table, and we just sat around and we talked. I think the idea, this concept of bringing doctors and engineers together, was such a revolutionary idea, and folks really took to it that they were willing to make their time available. So second year we had 75 people, then following year we had 100, and this program, the ecosystem grew, and every year whenever we would have this MedTech Summit, everybody would want to be there. And I think they were all seeing the potential for these young innovators to create something that's meaningful and for them to give back and to contribute. We were not paying them. We were not saying that they were going to get a business out of it. I think they genuinely wanted to participate in evolution of this whole space. you remember this is at that time in India where things were still not great economically, and the country was starting to emerge from economic sort of doldrums, and there was an aspirational value to this. So I think that made a lot of these folks, and many of those folks remain engaged till today. We have not paid them; they have not gotten anything out of it, other than simply joy of giving back to this community.
There was a mission focus with this program that sort of brought everyone together. It wasn't about any of us. It was about how do we create an impact at scale for India, right? For people who needed medical technology. So that seemed to be in some ways, the convening kind of the reason that everyone would convene. And to this day, the ecosystem, I think, continues to thrive because we share that mission focus.
So what didn't work? What were some hurdles that you were not expecting that you had to work through?
I think a lot of things didn't work. I mean, the first, for those who are involved, I think the first 4 years of the fellowship, we're still kind of finding our feet and trying to figure out what are the elements of our biodesign process that didn't, perfectly translate from the US to India. So I think that was number one. Number two was we learned that we needed to provide a lot more mentorship to fellows as they're going along the process. In fact, that mentorship continues. I think when we started the program, we assumed that we would provide maybe a year of mentorship, when people would graduate, that the ecosystem would take them on and mentor them, for an ongoing basis. But here we are 16 years later, and we're still mentoring the same fellows. So that's one of the challenges. We wind up sort of creating new programs and processes to sort of address those challenges. But
I think that's the strength of biodesign ecosystem here in the US. All of the mentors that give so much of their time, and there is a well-developed network of mentors, which is what we try to do in India and have succeeded to a certain extent, but I think it's still not there. We are not done with it, and especially the translation piece of which we'll talk about later.
Got it.
Those of us who were mentored by Raj and Anurag do not want to let go. So they're just in it for life.
And Ritu, I was actually going to ask you, again, I saw an old interview with Raj and Anurag where they talk about the fact that this program was not just about doing good for India, it was actually about improving healthcare in the world as a whole. So Ritu, you are now leading global programs at Stanford Biodesign. Can you talk about what we've learned from the India program, how that informs us at Biodesign and with the other global programs that have since followed?
Yeah, India was our first global program. Now there are global programs in close to 20 countries in addition to India, where biodesign is being taught. There are fellowships, there are graduate courses, many companies have been created, lots of innovation and patient impact has been created. But India was really the first one. What we learned with India was that the biodesign process works outside of Silicon Valley. It works outside of the United States. It works outside of US, Europe, developed markets. That this user-centered innovation process is at the heart of it. That's what you need. That's what you need to equip innovators with. And then certainly there is local context. Certainly there is a lot of other stuff, but the process is malleable enough that you can do that. So I think that was the first learning. So once we got that, we had another program, Singapore Biodesign, which was structured very similarly to India. And then sort of the floodgates opened, and a lot of people wanted to do a biodesign-like program. And so the question for us was, how do you scale this? And it's also an innovation question. It's not a product innovation question. It's an institutional innovation question. And so what we sort of came up with was a train the trainer program. And so for the last dozen years, we've been running a program called Global Faculty in Training, some of whom are here, GFIT fellows who are here today. And we've been training trainers. These are faculty members from institutions around the world who come and spend 6 months here at Stanford with us, learn the biodesign process, learn how to set up a program, and then go back to their home institutions and set up those programs. And then, as I mentioned, there have been many, many success stories: Brazil, Australia, Taiwan, Japan, Singapore that I mentioned, and our newest program, which is East Africa Biodesign, which is in Rwanda and Kenya. So that's, again, all of this, came from the learnings that we had in India. One of the big things that we learned, as Raj was alluding to, that it's not just about the fellowship. It's not just about finding that talent and making the biodesign process available to them, especially in places where the innovation ecosystem is immature. You sort of are signing up to mature that innovation ecosystem as well. And certainly in our East Africa Biodesign program, Krista, who can join us today, she's leading that effort on ecosystem development. So there have been lots of learnings. For example, if you look at the second edition of the Biodesign textbook, there's many, many global cases. And a lot of that came from the learnings that we had engaging with India and then engaging with these other global programs. And the learning continues. We're always getting better.
So India's health innovation landscape looks very different now, 17 years later. So can you talk about how we are engaged in India right now?
So one of the things that happened, building on what Raj was saying in terms of recognizing that a lot of our innovators still needed a lot of mentorship, and we remain engaged, but we realized that we were working with them one-on-one, and we were answering fairly similar questions. So we created what is called Founders Forum. And when we did that, we were able to sort of address the needs of a larger group of innovators, not just those that we had trained within our original biodesign program, but the broader ecosystem of biodesign programs or innovation programs that had come up. And so that sort of became a fairly successful initiative in itself over the last 7-8 years, where a number of companies have basically impacted tens of millions of lives. And they are now starting to make impact globally. Building on Ritu's point, I mean, there's an Asia Pacific innovation community. There are a lot of these companies have actually set up, offices, or they've sent their technologies to other parts of the world. So it's really scaled up to a certain extent. It's not fully done yet. I mean, India is a big country, and tens of millions still doesn't, add up to 1.4 billion people. But I think that that second phase of our evolution allowed us to get to this point. So I think where we are today, there's a very robust innovation ecosystem. 4,500 companies. By some accounts, there are 8,500. So we hear these numbers, but 4,500 for sure. We know, we have a list of those, and a pretty strong subset of them are commercially viable. They are already in the commercial stage. Would you agree, Raj?
Yeah, no, for sure. So the number of innovators has really skyrocketed, but there are a couple needs that remain, right? As folks invested in biodesign, we're always looking for problems to solve, and two of the remaining problems for these companies relate to how do they capitalize their companies. So meaning, how do you get private capital in to support basically a rapidly growing company? That's number one. Number two is, how do you scale your product commercially in the public health system in India, right? So there's part of the system is a little bit, it could be improved, which is the state governments have to procure and basically help distribute your medical technology. So we're focusing on those two elements as we sort of run our Founders Forum program. But we're seeing a extraordinary trajectory for these companies, but still a few challenges that remain.
Anurag, can you touch on the Every Heartbeat Matters initiative? That's one that's also had a big impact in India that you continue to work on. So if you can share more about that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So often when we talk about innovation, we talk about technology innovation. The way we think about this at Biodesign is technology-enabled innovation. And in the broad sense of the term, that once you find the unmet need, any modality that actually addresses the problem, or any combination of modalities that addresses the problem, should be deployed. Our last batch of Stanford-India Biodesign program with AIIMS and IIT Delhi actually found an unmet need in rheumatic heart disease space. And they said, I think another valve for that disease would be great, but I think what we really need is addressing this disease earlier in the evolution. When folks get strep throat, kids get strep throat, and that becomes rheumatic fever, then becomes rheumatic heart disease. So there are many stages of this disease where we can intervene. So we basically said that's an interesting opportunity, and we decided to start an initiative for that. And Edwards Life Sciences Foundation decided to fund that, and they have funded us for the last 9 years. And that has gone through several phases itself. Phase one was educating communities, and the awareness levels went up. Second phase was training the clinicians, that cardiologists, interventional cardiologists, and cardiothoracic surgeons, who basically would train clinicians earlier in the care pathway, ENT surgeons and primary care physicians. Now, thanks to all the work that has happened and the awareness that has been built, I think we are at a stage where we can start talking about elimination of rheumatic heart disease. So starting this year, actually starting last year, we started putting a strategy together. Starting this year, we are implementing that strategy for eliminating rheumatic heart disease in Uttar Pradesh. 240 million people state. It's as large as many of the countries, and it's a high rheumatic heart disease endemic country. And our hope is that in the next 5 to 7 years, we demonstrate that it's possible to eliminate rheumatic heart disease, and that we hand the program to state of Uttar Pradesh.
Very nice. So when you think about the future of health tech innovation in India, what do you foresee? How do you think things are going to evolve?
I think we're going to see more scaling of these technologies in the Indian public health system. And I think there's a desire for these Indian products to be exported to Africa and other emerging markets as well. I mean, I think that's the future. If you look at how generic pharmaceuticals have, really been distributed, manufactured and then distributed out of India, that's created massive public health impact. So I think that's probably the next big opportunity for India and for us to make a grander impact.
Yeah, and I'll just building on Roger's point there, India has 1.4 billion people. There's 5 billion people in the world that are part of Global South. And the unmet needs in these regions are fairly similar to what India sees. So there's no reason why the unmet needs that we find in India and the solutions that that our innovators develop don't find applications in the Global South generally. So we feel that there's a real opportunity to address major disease burden and significant under-penetration of medical technologies in these Global South countries by having Indian innovators focus on those regions. Of course, many of those technologies would likely be suitable here as well, and clinical unmet needs may be very similar. The context may be different. And indeed, we are seeing that. I think so. We just started this year at JP Morgan our first US-India Health Technology Innovation Health Technology Partnership Summit. It was in partnership with the Government of India, the Consulate General, and we had industry from the US and innovators from India come together, and we are starting to see that sort of bridge building, and hopefully that will allow us to scale these technologies broadly globally.
Ritu, as you've worked on the GFIT program, now you're leading global programs generally. For others who are interested in starting a similar program, what recommendations would you have for them?
So I think that one of the great things about the India program is that we have so many success stories to point to, both of course for the product innovations and companies founded and patient impact created, but also from an institutional level. As Raj and you were mentioning earlier, the biodesign process has been sort of adopted by multiple institutions across the country and is being taught regularly. So there's lots of success stories and lots of things that we have tried and we've learned about, sort of in terms of the types of structures, like should it be a graduate class, should it be a fellowship, or how does it get funded, the program itself, how do the innovators get funded. We have lots of best practices, as Anurag was mentioning, from say across our Asia Pacific colleagues. There's also a group in Africa that gets together and discusses biomedical innovation and biodesign teaching specifically. And certainly in North America, there's been a very strong push as well. So there's just, we have a lot of institutional knowledge now and a lot of learnings from close to 20 years of doing this. And so that's what we try to arm our global faculty with as they go back to their home institutions. And we have a pretty good track record so far.
Yeah. In the case of India, the government was there from the beginning and interested in making the program happen. So for people who may be starting programs where they are having to pitch to the government on the necessity for something like this, how would you advise they go about that? How do you make the case?
Easy to go first.
I'm not sure I have a great answer for that. I mean, I think this was a single instance in time where everything came together. But I think, I think pointing out there's probably, if this is a process that maybe takes about 20 years, 10 to 20 years to see the true fruits of the work. So setting up that there needs to be continuity of interest from the government from the get-go that lasts that time. It needs to be a whole ecosystem that needs to develop. It's not just a process, it's a surrounding support system. And the last thing I'd mention is that I think that generally as these new programs start, I think as I reflect back on the success of biodesign and even the India program, there was a heavy investment in the people, right, that comes through the program. And that's something we learned from Paul repeatedly, and that's something that we modeled ourselves in India. So I would sort of set that expectation with the government that this is more about the people than it is any physical products or anything else. It's really about people development.
Was your question about new programs within India?
No, in
Outside?
general.
Outside,
Yeah. Outside. Yeah. Can you talk about a bit more about some of the different program products that were developed? Ritu mentioned one, Nitin Sisodia's hearing monitoring device. Can you talk about some of the other programs and products that came out of that?
Well, so we could talk about there's one of the projects is actually for a neonatal resuscitation, and actually this is a need that was identified during the immersion during our 2009 2010 batch actually perhaps, but the need that was identified was that a lot of babies when they're born in India they don't breathe immediately after birth, so they need CPR, they need basically some positive airway pressure or ventilation. The problem is that in order to do these activities, you typically need 3 hands. So this innovation was to replace the handheld imbu bag and use a foot-powered pump. In fact, the device is actually, you can see just sitting over there on the shelf. But this product would allow a single practitioner to do all the steps needed for neonatal resuscitation. That product, I think, is in maybe like 15, 20 countries at this point, and it's helped thousands of babies survive. So that's just one of our successes.
Yeah. You've also mentioned the tinkering labs that were developed. Is there something you want to talk about some more?
Yeah. So do you want to talk about that, Aisha? So Aisha, which batch was she? She was 2011?
2011.
So 2011, Aisha Chaudhary, she in fact is very deeply involved with a lot of work that we are doing with our phase 2, which we'll talk about a little later. But she basically became she had a very interesting career journey. After she went back, she became part of the government and started working with pretty senior officials, Principal Certificate Advisor to the Prime Minister, Niti Aayog, which is the major planning commission. And one of the initiatives that she led was Atal Innovation Mission, which basically set up tinkering labs across India in various institutions. This is the time when India was starting to sort of figure out what it would need to do to bring innovation training to its school students and college students. So that has played a major role. It's been a very successful program.
Very nice. Anurag, recently you were on a podcast where you talked about the fact that policy was one aspect you did not necessarily think about when this program was started.
Yeah.
How has that, come to play a role in everything that we are doing, and how is that informing the phase 2 of the program?
Yeah, Josh had not started the policy program then. he knows. I've been after him to start a policy program in India. We learned the hard way. We basically realized that as we were working with our innovators, we were guiding them, we were mentoring them, and as we were helping them scale their technologies, we realized that there are 4 channels that they go through: a private sector channel in India, public sector channel in India, global public health channels, and then global developed market channels. The public health channels in India only have to go through the states, even though there are approvals, a lot of guidelines, everything are national in nature. Procurement happens at the state level because health is a state subject. So a lot of these innovators were getting stuck because the state government and federal government, central government didn't really have consonants. They basically were not aligned, and because this is not something that India had ever had to deal with. So we started talking to first the central government. We're already working with DBT. DBT has been an amazing partner, but we started talking to ICMR and other stakeholders. And then starting 2017 or 2018, we started engaging with states, and we started bringing these public health officials together. And surprisingly, there was a major unmet need there. They really wanted to come together. They wanted to do something about it. They just didn't know how. And once again, Stanford Biodesign became an excuse to doing it. And the innovators started talking to these public health officials. So policy has become a key element of our work. In fact, now we are starting to work with lots of states. We have conversations with 6 or 7 different states that are going on. One state, we are very close to signing an agreement. And with those states, our first requirement is we'll only work with you if you're willing to change your policy to support innovations that we are enabling, we are sort of mentoring, and as long as it meets certain evidential criteria and so on. So that's been a major learning for us, and I'm hoping at some point we'll have our policy program in India as well. There are officials there who are eager to participate.
So what does the next phase look like for the India program?
Raj, why don't you take it first, and then I'll
I think we continue our work with the Founders Forum. We continue to assess what are the needs of India, what are the needs of the entrepreneurs, and we continue to evolve our Founders Forum program along those lines. I think increasing a focus on things like manufacturing and exporting to other emerging markets will remain a focus, as well as sort of just driving more private capital into these companies. That seems to be rate limiting for a lot of the innovations to sort of get to market. So I think that will remain a focus. And I don't know, to the extent that we can serve as a model for other countries, we're happy to sort of share our recipes to sort of, to help other countries sort of develop these same types of ecosystems and successes.
So I'll just build on that last point that Raj made. We already have interest from East Africa Biodesign. We have interest from Asia Pacific Innovation Community. It's called APAC Biodesign Alliance. Australia, Taiwan, Japan, all of these countries have multiple programs. And this biodesign community, which was set up about 11 years back in Asia Pacific, a lot of them actually want to learn from our Founders Forum experience. It's something they all recognize that translation is a very hard journey. We are successful here in the US because of the ecosystem that has been built, the code that has been created. I think in India we are doing that, but I think we're willing to share with other countries. And I think I see in 10 years a global ecosystem of our global programs led by Ritu here that will basically share all of these lessons. And we already have in 6 continents we have biodesign programs, right? We don't have an Antarctica program, but so we already have a global community. But I think it's going to become stronger, and I think it would have an impact on how the governments view health technology innovation, and hopefully it'll also have a positive impact on the US needs as well.
Wonderful. When you think about the last 17 years and the experience of the program, what are you proudest of? All three of you.
I mean, it has been transformational for my career. I mean, I was a very, very, very early in my career when I was a Stanford-India Biodesign fellow, and it has shaped all the choices that I've made so far. I think the fact that we have created so much patient impact is probably the most transformational aspect of it. But the community, as Anurag was saying, the potential for it to be not just India but beyond, East Africa, Asia Pacific, etc., is truly transformational and really exciting, and sort of what helps us keep going as well.
Yeah, I'll go next. I would like Raj to have the last word on this one, but I think people that we have worked with, not only the innovators that we have trained, but also the mentors that we have worked with, the partners that we've been fortunate to work with. I mean, it's amazing for so many people to give so much of their time and energy without expecting anything in return. Has been amazing. So I think that's probably the thing that I'm most proud of.
I would echo that. I think it's the people that we've trained for the last 17 years and remain in close contact with. I mean, I think that's what what's most proudest of. But I'll share one story, which is, when each of our fellows graduated, I'd ask them individually what did they take away from the experience, and almost every single person had the same answer, which was the time here in this fellowship here at Stanford changed what they thought was possible in their careers. So I'll sort of, that's maybe what I'm proudest of, that people are maybe rethinking their career trajectories and how they can contribute at scale. So that's pretty neat.
Wonderful. I think this is a good time to take audience questions. So, well, yeah, let's start right in front. We have a microphone coming.
So I had a question about with Stanford India Biodesign, you mentioned kind of doing these tie-ups with IITs and AIMS. So these are all kind of premier institutes and often do have a lot of the infrastructure that they need to maybe support a program like this, whereas the majority of students in India are studying at tier 2, tier 3 engineering colleges often don't have like lab facilities. So I'm just wondering, have you ever has India Biodesign been able to kind of make a mark in those areas? And if not, like what would you say are kind of the steps that you need to
Probably
get
should
there?
talk about Chhattisgarh Biodesign. So one of the things that we've been talking about, I mean, we've been thinking about this for a long time, but it takes a lot for a biodesign kind of program to come together. You need to have the right kind of stakeholders engaged. And so we've been talking to Chhattisgarh, state of Chhattisgarh, which is a very rural, very tribal state. And over the last 1 year, we've done a series of roundtables with them. And the goal there is not just to train innovators in the top medical institutions and engineering institutions, but also to bring these last mile health workers, ASHA workers, ANMs, auxiliary nurse midwives, and train them in this methodology, because they ultimately they are dealing with the unmet needs on the ground. And often we think that their levels of education are not at par with, let's say, an MD, but I think identifying unmet needs doesn't require you to have an MD. It doesn't require you to have an engineering degree. I think if you develop a solution, you may need to have engineering skills, and you need to have clinical background to make sure that it does it the right way. But I think being close to the ground and identifying unmet needs, I think those stakeholders would be part of it. So that's a good example of where we're trying to go. And I think East Africa Biodesign in many ways is heading in that direction too.
Yeah, that's right. But before we go to East Africa Biodesign, I just want to say that one of the things that's really been strong, because now we have so much time with the India Biodesign program, is that just sort of the by osmosis almost. Like I went to high school in Bihar in a small, well, not small by population standards, but it's a relatively small town in Bihar. And over the last 10 years or so, I have had people from my high school reach out and say they heard something about biodesign. And just to Raj's point, are interested in exploring something that they would have never done before. They would have just been an engineer, or they've probably been a software engineer, but they're interested in that. So I think it's certainly about the institutions, but it's also just much broader than that in terms of impact.
Our Biodesign videos are available online, and if you look at where the interest is coming from, number one is the US, number two is India. So it is a broad-based sort of exposure to biodesign. Anyone who wants to learn the process, it's there for them.
Hello, great to see you all. I'm Nikhil. It's great to especially see both of you in person. Raj and Anurag, I know you've spoken quite a bit over the years. Something that I was really curious about that we've discussed a bit before has been about bridging the gap to treatment. So I've noticed a lot of biodesign innovations have been very focused on diagnostics, especially. And of course, diagnostics are only especially useful when there's proper treatment and follow-up that's done, which I think can be very challenging. And so I've just wondered, what has biodesign done in India to do that kind of bridging so that people who get diagnosed can actually find a provider, find a treatment, which might be beyond the scope of the actual biodesign innovation itself?
It's not actually. It's not. So there are a number of folks that we are mentoring within our Founders Forum who are looking at not only screening and diagnosis, but the care pathway management. Rheumatic heart disease program we talked about, it's all about eliminating. So that involves every stage of the treatment. But there are companies like CureAI that are part of our Founders Forum portfolio, and they are working on bringing patients to interventions. So I think it's changing. What happens in new innovation ecosystems, and this happened in the US too, early on, diagnostics and screening are the beginning of the funnel, right? You find more patients, you recognize that there's a substantial unmet clinical burden, and initially there's a medical therapy that comes, that gets applied, but in future there may be interventional technologies, the way it happened in the US, that might happen in India too.
Yes, good.
To your comment that physicians are stuck in their own world with their own ideas, I plead guilty. And I loved your idea about the neonatal resuscitation because I've been there with only two hands. Thank you. And congratulations on all your success. It's inspiring. in terms of presenting an idea, when you said you were sometimes looking for ideas, I've been working with a remarkable team of Stanford students, although 2 of them had to leave during the pandemic, as graduate students in biodesign. We're now on the 3rd of 4 medical device patent filings that are addressing needle stick injuries. In the US, more than half of healthcare workers get stuck. A third of first responders and law enforcement agencies, and a lot of children just get stuck with needles laying around. And in India, it's harder to get the exact data, but it's been estimated up to 70% sustain needle stick injuries that can, of course, transmit illnesses. There are 5 million global reported needle stick injuries and probably 30 or 40 million that are unreported. And the team, they dragged me out of my little focus, just like you were talking. And the people that I've been working with now are remarkable, including an amazing, good-hearted intellectual property attorney from Black Swan, if anybody's interested. But are these kind of ideas what you're looking for? Because India is we're trying to bring these, we did this through a charity for organ donation, and this is our tangent way of protecting organs. So are these the types of things that and if so, how does one connect and present the ideas?
Hey, do you want to take that?
I'd say important for us to make sure that if the needs observed here, make sure that that same need exists in the same way in India. In India, if you talk about needle sticks, there's multiple reasons, right? I mean, one, there's poor disposal of these needles. A lot of them aren't the safety needles in the first place. A lot of needles are re-sterilized, maybe improperly. So there's probably a broader set of needs that need to be solved. It certainly may be applicable. It would need to be revalidated, but it might be worthwhile. We can talk maybe afterwards about that specific need and innovation.
Can I make a broader point about that very quickly? Because there's a large army of innovators that are being trained, I think they will find the problems and they will address challenges of the kind that you're talking about, even if they are different from needs here. So I have no doubt in my mind that, because we already see kinds of unmet needs that innovators are working on, we didn't anticipate they would be. So I think that's at some point some innovator would say that's a problem I want to work on. Yeah.
There was someone here in the back.
See, the needle stick problem is a very inexpensive one. One thing I wonder about is these $1 million instruments that are being developed in this country. They're barely sustainable in this country. Do they transfer into second, third world? How does that work? And then the second question would be, okay, it sounds like you're starting with government agencies. Why not private practice or the private world?
So I can answer the second one, but do you want to take the first one?
Sure. Yeah. My day job is working for a company that does make $1 million instruments that do help healthcare testing. I think that to say that India is a poor country is true. To say that parts of India are rich are also true. Yeah. It is definitely a country of many, many contradictions. So are there people who would use an intuitive surgical robot? Absolutely. There are more. I mean, I think the growth rate for intuitive surgical in India is astronomical. And are there people who will probably not get surgery at all, let alone robotic surgery? That is also true. So I think that we shouldn't think that the only type of innovation that poor people deserve is low cost innovation. I think everybody deserves appropriate innovation that is affordable, that is appropriate in many ways, designed for their situation. And I think that's really what we're doing with India Biodesign, with East Africa Biodesign, is we're trying to make sure it's not just about low cost, it's about appropriate innovation, and there's a market for it.
Yeah. And there is some local manufacturing that's happening, and government of India is supporting quite a bit of that, even of expensive equipment. The other question that you asked about working with the government, actually we only worked with the government for the first phase of our program. Our last 7, 8 years, 9 years, we have not worked with the government directly as formal partners. We've worked with them, we've advised them, we sort of engaged with them. But most of our Founders Forum work happens outside of government structures. And even the work that we are doing with states, private sector is a part of that. Government is part of that. It's a public-private partnership kind of a model. And then last point I'll make is one of our newest programs that may be in a Western state would be likely with a private entity.
So you guys, congratulations. The three of you. That was an inspiring talk. And I think there's a lot of take-home messages. And to follow on just the previous question, one of the things I am hearing is it seems like there's pretty impressive private-public partnerships. In some ways, you could say much more developed than we have. And certainly the government resources at the adequate, appropriate times have been helpful. We're heading into an era in this country now where that is definitely changing. Are there any teaching points, and maybe even used from some of the other international programs where you've had the same effective private-public partnerships, that we could learn from you guys as we are addressing the challenges and problems that we're facing right now in this next period?
Raj?
I'm not sure I have an answer to that.
So, I did a sabbatical for a couple of years to work at PATH, where we did a lot of public-private partnerships in Global South, basically, LMIC regions. And even back then, we wondered why didn't we have that in the US? And I think part of the reason is that there's a love-hate relationship between government and private sector in this country, and for a good reason maybe. But I think the one lesson I think that we could learn is that I think each stakeholder has a role to play. And to the extent that we identify what that role is, we are clear about that. And then we sort of come together to partner. So for example, if there's rural United States where postpartum hemorrhage outcomes are pretty bad, is that a responsibility of a private sector institution? Or is that a responsibility of that particular state or the county or whatever? I think it's probably both. There's an opportunity, economic opportunity, but there's also a responsibility that the state has. And if that becomes clear, then you work together and figure out business models, which is what's happening in India. So I think there are lessons definitely. One example is Forest Health that Raj talked about. That partner, the Forest Health deployed its ophthalmological, fundus camera and ophthalmological screening technology in partnership with Apollo Health, which is one of the largest corporate healthcare chain in India, and state governments of wherever they were doing it. And it itself was an innovative startup. So, and that was a very successful program. So that's kind of how I would frame it.
I think we have time for one more question.
So great job on the podcast. And I want to follow up with that by asking, can you identify specific stakeholders or patterns? Because I know that all the environments are different, that indicate that these are anchor stakeholders and you know that you can predict a pathway to success. Is it the same across India, Asia Pac, and Africa, or is it like contextual to that specific external environment? Maybe it's two questions.
I think Global South, in my mind, and please correct me if you think differently, in Global South, government remains an important partner. I don't think government has a major lever, and they can actually, even with our rheumatic heart disease program, we are talking about doing this for the next 3 to 5 years, handing it to the state government so they can scale it because they have the resources, they have the wherewithal, they have the organization. They just need something that works. They don't want to waste their time on something that is just an experimental thing. So I think government remains a very important stakeholder across these different regions. And a private sector that is not constrained by too much regulation is a second set. So you can see how government also gets in there, right? Yeah. With regulation. So those are the two. And then last one, which is probably the most important one, but we don't explicitly talk about it, is the communities themselves. Communities being empowered, being educated in their health needs, being understanding of what ails them and what will address that ailment. I think that's sorry. So, for example, in rheumatic heart disease, we actually had a survey we would do before and after what their awareness of rheumatic heart disease was. Do you know what strep throat is? Do you know what rheumatic fever is? Do you know what rheumatic heart disease is? The tools are very simple, and especially with digital tools, you can do that pretty easily.
Yeah, just to add to that, I do think that the contexts are different. I think that is why it is important to be very, very deeply embedded in the local context. So, for example, in East Africa, we're working with institutional partners. Certainly there's academics, there's a smaller private sector, governments are very important, but there's a very large mission-based hospital network, a lot of charitable institutions involved in healthcare delivery in a way that there are some in India, but not as much. So I think it's very important to be very, very responsive to the local context.
Yeah.
Stakeholder analysis is true for everything. This is one of our chapters in biodesign. But what the stakeholders are, they do change across regions.
I think the takeaway is that the biodesign process is portable from country to country, and that analysis of the stakeholders does inform the solution ultimately. And we've seen that across geographies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was just amazing. Incredibly inspiring. A big idea, audacious, impossible that you guys made possible. It really is tremendous. Thank you for that and for really leading us into the world in such a positive way and creating a model that has inspired confidence across the world that it is possible. So thank you guys. I want to thank Awo and Ritu and Raj and Krista. We have some gifts here. I'm sorry. Ritu, Raj, and Anurag. Krista is not here. But as that's going on, I'll just remind everybody we have 2 more Innovators Workbench sessions coming up. The first is on March 10th with Michael Ackerman, who is now the CEO of Asani Bio, and he'll be talking about all of the things that he's done using the biodesign process to invent and create opportunities in biopharma. And Lynn Denen will be interviewing him. And then on April 16th, our former fellowship director and the chief scientific officer of Edwards, Todd Britton, will be here talking about Shockwave and his career. And he will be interviewed by Kate Garrett. So that's going to stay tuned for those. That's April 16th with Todd and March 10th with Michael. We have some refreshments here tonight. Again, thank you, Wilson Cincini, Goodrich, and Rosati for that. You can follow, if you don't follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on one of the social channels. You can find out more about what we're doing. I want to just say thank you to Awo, Deja Hill, Danny Rodriguez, Jill Hanneman, Linda Lucian, Megan Stawicki, Megan Nirkurar, and everyone else who helped set this up tonight. This is a big team effort for us, and hope you can stay for the reception, and I'm sure you guys will be bombarded with more questions. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.